For most Americans in 1945, the sound of an aircraft overhead no longer meant danger. The war was over. The skies were supposed to be safe again. Yet quietly and without headlines at first, a different kind of tragedy began to unfold, not overseas, but at home. The aircraft was familiar, beautiful, victorious. The P-51 Mustang, the very machine that had protected Allied bombers over Europe, was now landing on civilian airfields across the United States. And that was the beginning of a story few people talk about. After World War II, the United States was flooded with surplus military equipment. Tanks were scrapped, ships were mothballed, and thousands of combat aircraft were suddenly unnecessary. Among them were hundreds of P-51 Mustangs. To the public, this sounded like a dream, a war hero available for purchase. Magazines advertised them, dealers promoted them, newspapers celebrated the idea of ordinary Americans owning legendary warplanes. What was rarely explained was the truth. The P-51 was never designed for civilian life. It was built for young combat pilots trained under extreme pressure, flying with discipline drilled into them by war. It demanded constant attention. It punished hesitation. It did not forgive mistakes. But in the optimism of the post-war years, that danger was overlooked. Former military pilots bought them. Wealthy civilians bought them. Some men bought them to chase a childhood dream, to feel what it was like to fly a legend. And then families got involved. Wives, children, Sunday flights. The Mustang, once a weapon of survival, became a symbol of peace, at least on the surface. Yet underneath, nothing had changed. The engine was still brutally powerful. The torque was still violent. The landing characteristics were still unforgiving. Early civilian accidents began quietly. A takeoff that went wrong, a sudden roll after liftoff, a stall at low altitude. At first, newspapers called them pilot error, but a pattern was forming. One of the most haunting aspects of these accidents was who was on board. Not just pilots, entire families. There are records from the late 1940s where investigators arrived at crash sites to find no survivors, a father in the cockpit, a wife beside him, children in the rear. These were not stunt pilots. These were not reckless thrill seekers. They were ordinary people who trusted an aircraft that had been designed for war, not forgiveness. Eyewitnesses described the same scenes again and again. The roar of the engine, a short climb, a sudden loss of control, then silence. Burning wreckage in fields near small towns, neighbors running toward smoke, nothing left to save. Aviation authorities began to notice something deeply troubling. The P-51 was too fast for civilian reaction times. Its landing speed left no margin for error. Its tailwheel design caused sudden ground loops that inexperienced pilots could not correct. And worst of all, many civilian pilots overestimated themselves. They had flown trainers. They had flown light aircraft. They believed experience alone was enough. It was not. Behind the scenes, insurance companies quietly raised premiums. Some refused to insure Mustangs at all. Flight instructors warned buyers, often too late. By the end of the 1940s, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The war had ended, but the Mustang was still killing people. Not enemies, families. And the most tragic part was yet to come, because as the years passed, these accidents would no longer happen in empty fields, but in front of crowds. By the early 1950s, the P-51 Mustang was no longer just a private aircraft. It had become a showpiece. Across the United States, air shows returned as symbols of peace and pride. Families gathered at airfields. Children sat on shoulders. Veterans pointed to the sky and told stories of the war. And again, the Mustang took center stage. To the crowd, it was a flying monument, polished aluminum, roaring engine, victory painted on its skin. To the pilots, it was still a war machine that demanded absolute respect. That balance did not always hold. The first airshow accidents were shocking, not just because they happened, but because of where they happened. Not in empty fields, not on remote runways, but directly in front of spectators. At low altitude, with no room to recover, a Mustang losing control became unstoppable. Investigations later showed the same deadly chain. A steep maneuver, a sudden torque roll, a stall too close to the ground, impact within seconds. There was no time for correction, no time for ejection, no time for the crowd to react. In several cases, debris struck people on the ground. Parents who came to show their children history watched horror unfold instead. These moments changed how the public saw the Mustang. What had once been a symbol of victory now carried an unspoken fear. Behind the scenes, aviation authorities were struggling. They faced an impossible question. How do you regulate a warplane that civilians legally own? The P-51 was not illegal. It was not defective. It was simply too much aircraft for uncontrolled civilian environments. Pilots themselves began to speak out. Veterans who had flown the Mustang in combat admitted something uncomfortable. In wartime, we survived because discipline kept us alive. In peace, confidence killed people. Many civilian pilots underestimated the psychological difference between war flying and show flying. Combat pilots trained under strict limits. Airshow pilots often pushed limits because crowds expected spectacle. The Mustang punished spectacle. One former investigator described crash sites as eerily repetitive. Same angle, same spiral, same conclusion. What made these accidents even more painful was the innocence involved. Some pilots brought family members along during practice flights. Others flew over populated areas to demonstrate speed. When things went wrong, there were no second chances. In more than one recorded case, a Mustang went down in residential areas. Homes damaged, fires ignited, lives lost on the ground, people who had nothing to do with aviation. By the late 1950s, insurance companies effectively forced change. Premiums for P-51s became so high that only wealthy professional operators could afford to fly them. Training requirements increased quietly, not by law, but by necessity. The Mustang was being pushed out of casual civilian hands. Yet, even then, accidents did not stop completely. Why? Because the P-51 had one final transformation left. It was no longer just a warplane. It became a race machine. In air racing, Mustangs were stripped down, engines pushed beyond original limits, wings modified for speed. They flew faster than ever before, but also closer to the edge. Pilots knew the risks. They accepted them. Families, spectators, and history would pay the price when things went wrong. By now, the truth was unavoidable. The P-51 Mustang was never meant to live in peacetime skies filled with civilians. And yet, it continued to fly, because legends are hard to let go of, and because America, more than any other nation, struggles to ground its heroes, even when they become dangerous. The final reckoning would not come from regulation or fear. It would come from memory, from names etched into reports, from families lost, from silence after the engine stopped. And in the final chapter of this story, one question remains. Was the Mustang truly dangerous, or was humanity unable to let go of its power? That answer lies in what happened next.